It's good to see everyone here this evening. We have visitors and people we hadn't seen in a while come back and be with us, and we're grateful that you're able to be here in our Bible study. We're in Deuteronomy. Last time we stopped at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, where people haven't gone yet. This is over in the land of Canaan, but Moses is preparing them as the end of chapter 11 for what they'll be doing, and they will literally be going. They'll be given the blessings from Mount Gerizim. They'll give the cursing of if you don't do the law of God at Mount Ebal. We talked about, for extra credit, the town between there, Shechem, still is different kind of probably housing that people had in those days. But it was an important place in the middle of the inheritance of the promised land, in which a lot of things would take place. And one of the things that we're seeing in the book of Deuteronomy is that it's just not, well, we're going to talk about this one time and we won't see it again. You'll see this same thing being prepared in Deuteronomy 27. Now, if that bores you, I'm sorry. That intrigues me. How they accumulated these particular addresses that Moses did. He's reminding the people. He'll remind them again. He'll remind them again. And if you read in detail, hopefully you do, when we get into this chapter 12 and 13, you begin to see, well, he sure does repeat himself a lot. And the question is, why would he do that? And all of a sudden you'll find that there's a little piece of more information giving that relates to that. And he's unfolding certain things. And what we'll see when we answer our questions, we'll have to go through that whole chapter to get the whole details together to maybe answer the question fully. And hopefully we can bring out that full information. So there's a lot of repetition sometimes in the phrases, and it seems like he leaves that point. They'll come back and get it in a little bit later in the same chapter. And those are things that when you read your Bible, I hope you ask questions. Why would he do that? What am I missing here? Is there an animal there that's not mentioned in Leviticus 11th chapter? I'd like to know, why is it here and not there? It's intriguing. It's very exciting to study the Old Testament when we're trying to understand what God has revealed. It's not what he hadn't revealed. It's what he's revealed of why things are the way they are. So we're going to try to get the pieces together when we answer the questions, and I hope we can do that. But at the end of chapter 11, this is where he said you'll be. Chapter 27, we haven't got much further. We're going to be still, and this is where you're going to be. And he'll give some more details then of who's going to be involved in the cursing and the giving of the blessings. And so we'll say, well, that's probably a good reason why we have it repeated again. More details as you're getting closer and closer to the actual event taking place. We go into chapter 4. And in this second address, we see part 3, and it takes us all the way to chapter 15 and verse 23. So I got 12, 13, 14, and 15 as this part 3 of this one speech that we've been looking at, which is the second address that Moses has been giving. And so we ask the question, what does burning their Asherim mean in chapter 12 and verse 3? And some of you don't know what I'm talking about. Because what does your Bible say? Instead of Asherim, do you have the word groves? Anybody have the word groves? Yeah, a lot of people do. King James, we have that. In fact, the New King James, I think, has that. But when we'll look in details a little bit later, New King James will take you over to Asherim that we're talking about. And so we want to answer that question as we see. I'll begin reading. These are the statutes and the ordinances which ye shall observe to do in the land which Jehovah thy God of the fathers hath given thee to possess it all the days that you live upon the earth. So ye shall surely destroy all the places wherein the nations that ye shall dispossess serve their idols, or serve their gods, upon the high mountains, and upon the hills, and under every green tree. And ye shall break down their altars, and dash in pieces their pillars, burn their Asherim with what? With fire, and you shall hew down the graven images of their gods. If I didn't know what Asherim was, and I see the word groves, what are we talking about? Destroy their what? Idols. And you get it. We get that. But here is what's interesting. Why is it called that? And this was, and we see from the Bible, which helps us piece this together, but just to get our thoughts around, it's from, sometimes we'll see Asherah, Asherim, Asherah will be used, and you'll always see it in the context as if it were one. This is plural of that one. And instead of saying, Asherah, which is the goddess of futility, it was an Assyrian goddess, which the Canaanites copied. I did that a lot. In fact, Israel does that a lot here, God's own people. They do a lot of copying. But the point is that there was that particular goddess of fertility. I would like to put pictures up there for you, but I don't think that would be appropriate. When we see the different images, and there were a lot of different images that have been accumulated through the years of different aspects of fertility, of them being this particular goddess. But a lot of times you'll see in some of your translations the pole of the Asherim. They could be made of wood. They also could be made of metal. Can you burn metal with fire? You sure can. And after a while, it becomes so brittle you can turn it to dust like they do here. And so, but a lot of times in the groves, you would have the trees. They would make them tall, slender pillars, and that would be their Asherim that we're observing. And so he warns them that they are to tear those things down. When you go in and conquer those nations, you do that. What's the history of Israel regarding the Asherim? Did they, centuries later, or hundreds of years, not centuries, but hundreds of years later, have they eliminated it? No. Very early on, we see, back in 2 Chronicles 15:16, we have observed where Asa is his king. These are God's people. In 2 Chronicles 15:16, we see some things that we're doing of reform. It says, and also Maacah, the mother of Asa. So here is Asa the king. He's got his mother, queen mother. He said he removed from being queen because she had made an abominable image for an Asherah, singular, for an Asherah, rather. And there's this goddess, and there's the plural Asherim, which there would be used, but we're speaking about the same thing. Here is the mother, queen mother of a king, and he removes her for being queen. Why? She made this image. And you're not supposed to do that with God. And what did he do? He has to cut down her image and made dust of it. That's why some people think this might be metal. Made dust of it. Didn't turn it to ashes, but made dust of it, Hebrew. And burned it all at the brook Kidron. Kidron is the east side of Jerusalem. And there's a valley of Kidron. There's a brook of Kidron. What did Moses do when he pulverized the calf, and what did he do? He turned it to powder, or did he make the people drink? He kind of follow the lineage of Moses, a lot of these things. And that's what they did. And he brought in the house of God the things his father had dedicated. So he's making reforms, but this is the mother of a king that we see doing that, and the king does the right thing. We go a little bit further. In 2 Kings 21 and verse 3 in time, we say, well, it didn't, people would do the reforms and then would come back to this particular problem. Manasseh, here he is, 12 years old, and he begins to reign. He doesn't do that which is right. And Hezekiah made some reforms. For Hezekiah, his father, had destroyed, and he reared up altars for Baal and made an Asherah, as did Ahab, king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. So a lot of times the context you'll find it serving the planets, the host of heaven, stars, that sort of thing connected with this goddess of fertility. And he rears them up. They're altars for Baal and made them, just like Ahab had done. So we go back in time. Remember Ahab, who was his wife? Jezebel. And we remember the battle of Mount Carmel that we see taking place in the 18th chapter, Kings, and we see what happened on that occasion. But one of the things that's interesting to see is that there were 400 prophets of Asherah, the Asherim, who indeed not were prophets of Baal. There's your male side of it. But 450 of them, 400 of Asherah, and they sat at Jezebel's table. It doesn't mean necessarily that they literally sat at her table, is that she supported them with her bounty. They were supported by her if they did not sit at her table. But they were prophets. What happened on that occasion? Elijah showed you, why go limping between two sides? If Baal be God, serve him. If God be God, you serve him. And you think, well, the battle's solved. And all those people were killed. But it kept cropping up among God's people. And I want to ask the question, why does that happen? Why do those events take place? The Bible says we'll see what gods that they had, and we're interested in how they did that. We want to do the same thing. Does God, is he going to be set forth in an image? You're not going to have any graven images for him. So what did they do? How did they know God? When he's not doing miracles, how did they do that? Why were New Testament Christians called atheists? Why were they called atheists? They serve God. They confess Jesus to be the Son of God. He's no longer on earth. It's that invisible things. And what do we lack? We lack visible things. We like to hold to things that, hey, there's my God, God of fertility. I know God is the God of everything, but here's something I can represent God of fertility, and I need to latch hold of something. I need to see something. I need to have something that's concrete. And this spiritual thing here is just a little too nebulous for me. And they get captivated by, we got a God, we got a goddess, we've got this God, and that, well, you won't be called an atheist. There's the God. And yet we say, no, there's my God. And it may be that we say they want a king just like the other kings. We want to be like the people around us. Who's ruling us? Well, who's ruling God's people? I can't see him. He's in heaven. And you can do miraculous things that say, well, you just got lucky this time. That little army beat our big army, just got a little lucky this time. But we got a king. He's sitting on his throne, and we can see it. And I think that has a lot to do with how God's people can be turned into something that we think is ridiculous. And they make themselves look ridiculous when the kings did their reforming, but that heart and that type of power that people have and their influence, I think that's part of the reason why we see so much of that going on. Every generation need to be renewed in the teachings of God, and they're being prepared before they go in. You're going to flag the storm, but this is not the first time. We saw it in Deuteronomy 7. Repeat, because that needs to be entrenched in the heart of people to make them holy and to keep them that way. So should not be laborious for you or dull or I'm not interested or it's no longer, I've heard that, let's go on. Think about it. Why is that being stressed? It's because there's an important part to play. And when we look at ourselves today, we can be like the people around us. We want something concrete. And yet we're serving a God that's invisible. And we've never been to heaven yet to see if it's there. We've never seen Jesus Christ. We've never seen the Holy Spirit. And yet we're here on Wednesday night studying the Old Testament when we're New Testament Christians and say, why? Why? Because we learn principles that will help us in our life as a Christian. Burning their Asherim was taking care of the idolatry and these images of idolatry, which was the female side of Baal. And it's kind of discouraging to see we have to talk about the events that happened after that. I haven't covered all of them. That's just enough to get to realize they kept on having problems with the gods in the land that they possessed. And that's kind of what the point is. How come Rome had to speak Greek? How come Greek becomes the language? Because the culture. Rome, you may have the power, you may have the army, the culture will win. And we as Christians have to fight the culture we live in. That's the battle we're having. And one of the things is I'm not going to be like the world. I'm going to be like God would have me to be. And what is our problem? How do I get rid of money? Isn't that a god of our time? If I am covetous, that's idolatry. What are we covetous of? Oh, you don't want to limit yourself to things. We want to get what buys those things. So it's money. Money means power. Money means access. Money means pride and the glory thing. And now, how are you and I going to get rid of that? Go to plastic? We'll have a rude awakening, won't we? So we're living in something that we can never eliminate. We got to live, don't we? Well, they'll put me on a bill or something. Well, I'll have to pay it one day, whatever the currency is. So you and I got a big issue. And one of how we conquer that is that I'm not going to let that control me, even though I can't go in and burn up all the money in the world and burn up everything connected with money. I can't do that. God says, I want you to be in the world, but not of the world. And which is the God that we have to constantly face? Materialism. I'm going to serve the God of mammon, or I'm going to serve the God of heaven. And when I understand our weaknesses in Old Testament times, why did they keep going back to those gods? They didn't do what God said, eliminate them. But they kept coming back in history because they wanted to be like the people around them. And you and I, we don't want to be people around them, but the very thing that can grab us and can take us away from the faith of the gospel and fill us with very much sorrows, Paul's warned us about that. It's called what? Not money. What is it? The love of money. Now we can fight that. We can fight that. And God has blessed us with prosperity, but they're not going to be our God. God gives us the ability to be wealthy. We understand we're going to always please God. We've already seen, you'll go in that land and you get all these things that and you're living prosperous, you'll forget me. That's a principle. I've got to fight against that. I don't want to ever forget God has blessed me. So that's what you and I are dealing with today. But we learn from these principles of how we should live our lives. So what, question one, you have any more you want to add? You had your hint, David? Yeah, that's good. That's right. All right, question number 2. God's people were to offer their burnt offering and other sacrifices in the place that seemed right in their own eyes. I see you shaking your head. You like false? Why? Why do you say false to that? That's right. But reason I see that because in Judges, they did everything which is right in their own eyes, and that was wrong. That's not his argument here. What his point is what has been said. I will choose the place. And what makes you think that is the fact, verse 8 says, ye shall do after all the things that, it said, ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day. Every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. Well, if you're doing this in your day, and Moses, you're leading us, how come it's wrong to do that? It's not because what we see in Judges. I'll become my standard, and I will be the standard in which I'll do right in my own eyes. That was Judges. This is Deuteronomy. But that's default with me. I've studied Judges, and I go back to Judges and realize they did right in their own eyes. They're not serving God, and that's why this answer is false. No, that's not why this answer is false. That'll be our study in Judges. This question says we've been doing everything right. We're doing everything in our own eyes, and it's been okay. That's the implication. That's the inference. I think it's necessary inference. But when you go into the land, and I choose the place, where God chooses the place where my name will be, that's where you offer your sacrifices. And he repeats it and repeats it and repeats it all through here. It comes back to it all the time. And we begin to ask the question, see, they've been traveling. They've been going from place to place. And he's speaking specifically of the offerings in verse 6. Bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices and tithes and heave offering. Sometimes that's been in different places. What is convenient for you is the way it's been done, and apparently okay. And that just takes me out of Judges. So what in the world's going on here? And it'll add another little problem that we will see, and that's why he goes and repeats things. But you'll notice in verse 6, all these offerings, the firstlings of your herd and your flock, and there you shall eat before Jehovah your God, and ye shall rejoice all that he put in your hand, and to ye and your households wherein Jehovah thy God hath blessed thee. So here we're looking as when they come into the new place that he's provided for them. Verse 5, and the place which Jehovah your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there. When Solomon dedicated the temple, in the 8th chapter of Kings, when he did that, he said, that's where your name is. Is God's glorious presence, will that be found in the temple? That's where his name is going to be. We're the church, we're the temple of God now as a church. Is that where his name is? Yeah. We've been baptized into his name. We're followers of him. And so here are the tithes, and there would be the first things of a lot of possessions that they had. And they've been able to do what was right in their own eyes as far as convenience. What have they done? Verse 9, for ye are not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance. It's not a judge's problem. It's the fact we're not there yet. We've been traveling. And what you'll find is that in Shiloh, for a while, is where the temple will be, or the house of God would be. In Shiloh, not Jerusalem. And then it will be moved to Jerusalem. And as they would have the place located, they were not to be doing as they've done before. And we'll find this is not the last time he speaks about this. Your inheritance God hath given thee. Now, verse 20 says, when God shall enlarge your border, as he hath promised, and he'll speak about what he shall eat and so forth. And there's another aspect of all of this, but it'll be, what am I killing for food and what I'm going to offer for sacrifice? That's why he repeats himself. He's got something else another context. So we're following that line of thinking and realize that this is new information. Every time he repeats himself, it's really new. something I need to grasp if I'm going to understand Deuteronomy. Verse 11, it shall come to pass in that place which Jehovah your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there, thither shall you bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices. I just said that. Burnt offerings and sacrifices earlier. Why repeat that? Because he said this is what's going to happen when you come into the land. You'll be doing that. Your choice vows and so forth. It says in verse 12, God, ye and your sons and your daughters, your men servants, your maid servants, Levite that's within your gates, for as much as they had no portion or inheritance with thee. He's going to repeat that again throughout this chapter. And so, take heed to thyself, thou offer not thy burnt offerings in every place that thou seest, but in the place where Jehovah shall choose in one of thy tribes, there shalt thou offer thy burnt offerings, and there shalt thou do all that I command thee. So, there'll be a time when I've given you rest. And now we're going to see what happens when he adds to your land. And you really are far away. He'll repeat himself. Because there's a new problem. And he's not just being repetitive because he's just wants to bore you. No, we want to pick up what new thing is he emphasizing. And I hope that we're able to do that. So the answer is yes, false, but it may be for different reasons than you think until you read the text. And my first default, judges. It repeats it over and over again. They did right in their own eyes. They did not have a leader. They did not have a judge, and that's not the problem here. They just hadn't had a place to dwell yet. And they'll be there. Question number 3. The gazelle and hart should be eaten as food, but not offered as a sacrifice unto God. True or false? I think that would be important if I were a Jew. And I want to, let's answer that. All right, let's look at verse 22. Even as the gazelle and as the hart is eaten, so shalt thou eat thereof. The unclean and the clean may eat thereof alike. Wow, the clean and the unclean, you can eat both? And, yeah? All right, my question is about the animal. Could you offer a gazelle and a hart for sacrifice? It's unclean. Could you eat a hart or a gazelle for food? It's clean. It's clean and unclean. And it'll make us clean or unclean. But that's the point he's hitting at. Even as the gazelle and as the hart is eaten, so shalt thou eat thereof. The unclean and the clean may eat thereof alike. It's unclean for sacrifice, and you can't eat it with that. But that's I think that is the difference of what we're looking at. I've looked at I think that's not, but it's not. It's repeated. I've already hit on that, so I don't want to do that. But what is a hart? It's a deer. You got to use that, and we're going to see a number of the animals and some of the names I've never heard before. But we'll try to make sense of all of that. So in this context of the gazelle and the hart and sacrifices, he stresses now the things about the blood. And we pick up the next question is why were the Israelites not to eat blood? Don't give me Leviticus 17 or 7, whatever you want to do. You can, because he's going to hit on it here. But notice how he speaks about in the context of the gazelle and the hart. We pick up in about verse 20. When Jehovah thy God shall enlarge thy border, as he hath promised thee, and thou shalt say, I will eat flesh, because the soul desire to eat. It's for food. It's okay now. We've already established that. Thou mayest eat flesh after the desire of thy soul. You want it for food, it's okay for food. And the gazelle and the hart's okay for food. And he says, if the place which Jehovah thy God shall choose to put the name there be too far from thee, thou shalt kill of thy herd and of thy flock, which Jehovah thy God hath given thee as I've commanded thee, and thou mayest eat within thy gates after all the desire of thy food, of thy soul. He's speaking about satisfying your hunger, not satisfying your sacrifice responsibilities. Because that can't be offered on the altar. Even as the gazelle and as the hart eat, and so shalt thou eat thereof, the unclean may eat thereof alike. Only be sure that thou what? Here's where we come to the blood. You're not supposed to eat blood. Why does he say it here? For the blood is the life, and thou shalt not eat the life with the flesh. Leviticus, we'll see, is kind of the life of the flesh. But you're going to eat the flesh, and you're going to eat it now in a context of satisfying your hunger, and you haven't drained the animal of his blood. You're not going to do that. You're not going to eat the blood with the flesh. With the flesh. Now that's not a medium rare steak. That's draining the blood, and but the people in the world at that time, that was indeed an issue. And what were they to do with that blood? The second corollary to that question. What were they to do with that blood? Verse 24, thou shalt not eat it, thou shalt pour it out upon the earth as water. Drain the animal of his blood. And that's what they were doing. Now our question is, are Christians governed by the new covenant? Are we governed by the new covenant to eat blood? Can we eat blood? David? What's that? Yeah. Well, take me there and make your point. What do you see there in Acts 15? What, 29? Okay, I get you. All right. And notice in verse 28, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit. He's writing the letter to Christians, Gentiles, primarily, that they don't have to be circumcised in order to be saved. Well, they could, that was what the Jews were demanding. And he said, you abstain from same sacrifice to idols and from fornication. Is that a demand of the Christian today? We sure would do that. But see, out in the Philippines, you can go eat blood with those people. After all, I'm going over there to preach for them. I need to kind of deal with their society and deal with them. Should I be eating blood? No. This is for Christians. And notice the point, things strangled. They're put to death. They don't drain the animal. It's not kosher and so on as we think about the Jewish practices. And there were, in fact, Philippines, they literally drink the blood. And that's something in their culture. And they have to be taught that, to go against that. So even though it's an Old Testament practice, it's pretty plain in the New Testament that that's something we're not to do as well. All right, question number 5. Why were the Elites distinctly pointed out as not to be forsaken? Notice in verse 19, and it's not the only place, but get back over there. Why were they not to be forsaken? You know that. Did they have an inheritance like the other people had, that how they were going to be given land and so forth? They did not. They did not have that. You're not supposed to forget the Levite, because they don't have a portion like the rest of them do. And we're going to see a little bit later in this speech, he'll put the Levites with the fatherless and the widow. And every third year, the tithe would be given for that purpose. But they were also to take care of the Levite when they brought their sacrifices and tithes. Yes, sir. He's not drinking either. That's true. All I can say is that, honor the context, it wasn't dealing with the deals of transfusion, and that's the only thing I can offer. But I've had the same issue, and that's very true. All right, and we could go through all the different passages. I'm not going to do that because you just look every time they're doing that, there's something being emphasized, and we'll be adding the fatherless and the widows to them a little bit later. We don't see that here in that verse, but we see it in verse 12, and I think in verse 19, verse 12 says, "And you shall rejoice before Jehovah God, and your sons and your daughters, your men servants and maid servants, and a Levite that is within your gates, for as much as he hath no portion nor inheritance with you." And then we come, and that's the answer to that. Okay. Question number 6: Why should God's people not be infatuated with or use the religious practice of others as a pattern for serving God? Notice in verse 31, "Thou shalt not do so unto Jehovah thy God, for every abomination to Jehovah which he hateth hath they done unto their gods, for even their sons and daughters do they burn in the fire to their gods." What was that about? We want to be like the nations around us. What's sobering about that? If you do that, what might you do? To Molech. He was the people in Canaan would be involved in doing that. In fact, Ahaz does that. He's a king, and we'll have to stop there. Lord willing, we'll pick that question up, and then we'll proceed on through lesson 4. Thank you.